There is a moment, small, instinctive, almost invisible, when the hand reaches toward food. It does not ask for permission. It does not hesitate. The fingers move with quiet memory, shaped by generations, shaped by the simplest truth that before spoons and forks and elegant silver, there were only hands. This is where our story begins. Long before empires rose, before tables were carved or bowls shaped, before etiquette was invented or napkins folded, humans ate with their hands. Not out of wildness or lack, but because it was the most natural thing in the world. Eating, after all, is not just about hunger. It is about closeness. It is about sensing. It is about knowing the warmth, the weight, the softness of what sustains you. Imagine the first shared meals. A group gathered around a fire. No plates, no chairs, no divisions. Only warmth and presence. Fingers passing roasted root, torn meat, cooled fruit. Each hand reaching not only for food, but for connection. We forget how much our hands remember. The texture of bread before it is broken. The softness of berries at their peak. The way warmth lingers in food that has just left the flame. In these early meals, there were no utensils, but there was ritual. Anthropologists tell us that eating by hand wasn't random. It followed patterns: who served whom, which hand was used, how food was shared. Even without written language, there were unspoken codes, gestures of respect and belonging. In many early societies, to touch food was to understand it. Before pots and pans, hands stirred. Before knives, hands tore. Before serving spoons, hands offered. The hand was an extension of the meal itself, both giver and receiver. And in that touch, something beautiful happened. Eating became personal. Not individualized, but intimate. You felt the food. You responded to it. You learned its language. In a world with no mirrors and no clocks, the hand was how we measured our days. A handful of grain, a palmful of water, a piece of fruit just large enough to cup. Even hunger was understood in the fingers, the way they shook, the way they hesitated, the way they ached for nourishment. Early evidence from prehistoric cave sites shows animal bones with teeth marks and fracture patterns, suggesting meat was eaten off the bone by hand. Tools existed, but not for eating. They were used to hunt, to skin, to prepare. Eating was something else, something sacred. Children learned to eat by copying the gestures of their parents. There were no lessons, only observation. A piece broken here, a scoop there, a pause, a chew, a passing hand. This was education. And through this, the hand became not just a tool, but a teacher. The story of eating with hands is not primitive, it is poetic. Even today, babies learn first through touch. Before they can name or point, they grab. They explore the world by what they can hold, squish, taste. There is wisdom in this instinct, an ancient rhythm that connects us to all who came before. When early societies developed agriculture, mealtime changed, but hands remained central. In Neolithic settlements, where grains were ground and stews bubbled over open fires, families still ate together, using hands to tear bread, to scoop porridge, to taste. Clay bowls may have been passed, but the connection was still skin to nourishment. The first tables were not furniture. They were laps, stones, earth. Meals were taken where people gathered. The idea of setting a place came much later. At first, there was only the meal and the moment, and in those moments, hands did the remembering. Every meal was also a conversation between skin and sustenance. What is warm? What is ready? What is too much? The hand answered. The idea that the hand was less clean than a fork or spoon did not yet exist. Cleanliness was a matter of ritual, of washing, of intention. In fact, in many early cultures, to eat with your hands was to eat with reverence. You washed before. You ate mindfully. You honored the food by touching it respectfully. In ancient Mesopotamia, evidence from clay tablets suggests communal dining practices that involved shared bowls, multiple people dipping into the same dish with their hands. There were no personal plates. The idea of food as individual possession had not yet taken root. Food was communal. Touch was trust. You did not eat with those you feared. You ate with those you belonged to. Over time, regional practices began to form. In Egypt, depictions on tomb walls show figures reaching into low bowls with their fingers, often seated on the ground. Food was served on shared platters, vegetables, bread, fish. Everyone ate from the same source. The act of reaching into a common dish was not only practical, it was symbolic. It meant equality. It meant shared fate. It meant mutual care. You took only what you needed. You left enough for others. Your hands did not rush. And if someone served you with their own fingers, it was an act of deep respect. Even in ancient India, eating with hands was ritualized to extraordinary levels. Ayurveda, the ancient Indian system of medicine, teaches that each finger is connected to an elemental energy. The thumb represents fire, the index finger air, the middle finger space, the ring finger earth, and the little finger water. When food is touched with all 5 fingers, it is believed to activate digestive energy, preparing the body to receive nourishment more completely. Eating is not merely a biological act, it is spiritual. It is a joining of body, mind, and meal. To eat with the hand is to bless the food. The motion is slow, the awareness is heightened, the gesture is grateful. In this way, eating becomes prayer. In many African and Middle Eastern traditions, similar reverence is given to hand eating. Specific hands are used, typically the right, as the left is reserved for personal hygiene. Meals are shared, gathered around a low table or mat. Food is torn, scooped, folded. There's laughter, storytelling, connection. Children are taught not just what to eat, but how to offer, how to wait, how to take. The meal becomes a lesson in patience, humility, generosity. We often think of forks and knives as symbols of civilization, but civilization existed long before their arrival. In the hand, there is grace. It responds, it adapts. It listens. It can feel when something is too hot. It can adjust when something is too soft. It can hold with care what a spoon might crush. And perhaps more than anything, it can connect. The hand connects food to mouth, but also person to person. When one hand feeds another, literally directly, it is an act of profound intimacy. We see this in weddings, in rituals, in feeding the elderly, the sick, the very young. It is the oldest expression of care, and it carries weight. Somewhere along the way, in certain parts of the world, this was forgotten. Tools began to replace fingers. Individual plates replaced shared platters. Tables grew longer, seats more formal. Distance entered the meal. Cleanliness became confusion. Etiquette took precedence over closeness. But before all of that, there was the hand. And it did more than feed. It made the meal matter. In the soft glow of firelight, long before metal touched lips or porcelain touched fingertips, hands moved with intention across meals shared beneath open skies, within temple walls, beside bustling streets, and beneath palace ceilings. This is the part of our story where eating becomes tradition, where hands are not only tools but symbols of identity, heritage, and belonging. Civilizations rose, fell, and traded, carrying with them spices, fabrics, ideas, and gestures. To eat with the hand was not universal, but it was widespread. It shaped rituals, it reflected values, and in many places, it still does. Let us begin with Egypt. In the ancient world, Egypt was both practical and spiritual. The Nile brought life, the sun gave order, and meals, though modest for most, carried quiet ceremony. In household paintings and funerary inscriptions, we see the act of eating preserved across centuries. Bowls of lentils, figs, bread, and fish, often served on low trays, with hands reaching in. The bread was round, flat, often torn. Food was dipped, not stabbed, eaten communally, not individually. In banquet scenes from noble houses, we find carefully groomed guests seated on mats, servants pouring wine, platters arranged with precision. But still, there are no forks, only fingers. A slow rhythm of sharing, a flow of food that encourages stillness. Eating was not rushed, it was not segmented. It was a kind of extended welcome. Next, we cross the sea to Greece. Ancient Greece, philosophical, athletic, democratic, held meals as central to life. Symposiums were the heart of public conversation. Meals shared among men of thought, accompanied by wine, poetry, and quiet debates. Yet these thinkers, these minds that shaped the Western world, ate with their hands. They dipped bread into stews, they rolled meat and olives into manageable bites. They sat on couches, reclining slightly, food placed on small tables within reach. The hand was never seen as improper. Only the misuse of it was. Etiquette did exist, but it was about grace, not utensils. You were judged by how generously you passed food, how cleanly you ate, how little you wasted. The idea of restraint, of moderation, was honored, but fingers were not shamed. In fact, one could argue they were celebrated. To eat well was to eat wisely, and to eat wisely was to be deliberate, not mechanical. From Greece, we move to Rome, where spectacle and civilization met in the marble halls of empire. Romans dined in tricliniums, three-sided dining rooms where guests reclined on cushions, eating from low tables. Meals could last hours. Dishes arrived in courses, carried by servants, offered in bowls and platters. The wealthy used spoons, occasionally knives, but not forks. Instead, they used fingers, delicately but directly. They prided themselves on refinement, and yet hand-eating was central. Even during the famed Roman feasts, where decadence became excess, there was no aversion to the hand. Rather, the hand was trained, sometimes even perfumed, prepared as a vessel of both nourishment and sensuality. Food was meant to be felt. The act of bringing it to your mouth, measured, slow, intentional, was part of the pleasure. In fact, it was common for wealthy Romans to have a servant whose job was simply to wash guests' hands between courses, and another to offer a basin of water with floating petals or citrus slices for rinsing. Cleanliness, yes, but never detachment. From Rome we travel east to India, where eating with the hand is not only traditional but sacred. As we touched on before, Ayurveda teaches that eating with the fingers engages all 5 elements. It activates digestive fire. It awakens sensory awareness. The hand is not passive, it is present. Food in many Indian traditions is served on a banana leaf or a thali, small metal bowls on a single platter. Rice, curries, chutneys, vegetables, breads, arranged not just for nutrition, but for color, for balance, for rhythm. The right hand is used to mix, scoop, shape, not with haste but with reverence. The left hand, reserved for cleansing, is kept aside. Children are taught how to fold chapati, how to balance grains and sauces with thumb and fingertips, how to use motion to cool a bite before placing it on the tongue. There is pride in this practice. A learning curve, yes, but also a heritage passed from elder to child without words. To eat with your hand here is not crude. It is cultured. It is alive. It is a meditation. Across the Indian subcontinent, this tactile tradition continues, from homes to temples, from street vendors to wedding banquets, and with every bite, something is remembered, that food is not a transaction. It is a relationship. Next, we turn to the Islamic world, where hand-eating is guided by prophetic etiquette, adab al-aql, a code rooted in respect. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is recorded to have eaten with his right hand, taken small bites, and shared food from what was nearest to him. These simple habits became foundations of table manners across the Muslim world. In Arab cultures, meals are often served on a large communal platter. Flatbread serve both as vessel and utensil. A piece is torn, used to scoop stew, beans, or rice. The movement is fluid. The bread absorbs flavor. The fingers guide, but never dominate. Hospitality is core. Guests are honored with food. But they are also trusted, because to share a platter is to share space. Clean hands are assumed, generosity is expected, waste is discouraged. It is common in many homes to eat seated on the floor, knees folded, bodies close. Conversation flows not in interruption, but in accompaniment to the meal. The hand here is not a solitary thing, it is part of a larger gesture, of welcome, of grace. In Africa, too, communal hand-eating remains a beautiful tradition. Across West Africa, dishes like jollof rice, egusi soup, or fufu are served family-style. Fufu, made from pounded yam, cassava, or plantain, is shaped by the hand and used to scoop stew. The technique is subtle, learned young, and deeply intuitive. In Ethiopia, injera, a sour, spongy flatbread, is both plate and tool. Food is layered upon it, then pinched and folded into bite-sized portions. To feed someone else from your own hand, a gesture called gursha, is a sign of love and deep respect. Throughout these cultures, eating with your hand is not simply about function. It is about proximity. To the food, to the earth, to each other. And what is most striking, what stands out again and again, is the way time behaves differently at these meals. They are not rushed, they are not segmented. They unfold. Because to eat with your hand is to slow down. You cannot scroll, you cannot multitask, you are engaged, and in that engagement something inside softens. The noise quiets, the senses open. There's a reason why, even in modern homes where cutlery is abundant, some foods are still eaten with the hand. Corn on the cob, bread, pizza, sushi, fruit. There is a reason we reach for chocolate with fingertips, not chopsticks, because the hand still remembers, even when the mind forgets. In this journey across cultures, what we see is not poverty of tools, but richness of tradition. The hand, humble though it may seem, has shaped empires, blessed meals, and held the quiet heart of the table. Long before etiquette became performance, before forks clinked and knives gleamed, before napkins were folded into swans, there was the warmth of skin. the generosity of gesture, the whisper of fingers meeting food. And in many corners of the world, that whisper still speaks. There are meals that feed the body, and there are meals that nourish the soul. The difference is not always in the ingredients. Sometimes it's in the hands, in the way they move, in the way they reach without speaking, in the way they offer, receive, and linger. In this chapter, we explore how eating with the hands became more than a method. It became a gesture, a language of hospitality, reverence, humility, and care. Especially in the medieval world and in traditions shaped by faith and philosophy, the table itself became a space of touch. We begin in the great halls of medieval Europe, stone-walled, echoing, candle-lit. The feasts of kings and nobles were not only displays of wealth, they were opportunities to affirm order. Food was abundant, yes, but it was also orchestrated. Who sat where, who was served first, who carved the meat, who tasted the wine. And yet for all the ceremony, eating still began with the hand. Forks were rare, viewed with suspicion. Knives were common, but primarily for cutting. Spoons were used for broths, but even then, fingers were preferred when texture was part of the experience. Bread was a staple, and not just as food. Thick crusts, called trenchers, served as edible plates. Meat, sauce, and vegetables were piled on top, soaking the bread. Once the meal ended, the trencher was either eaten or given to the poor. One hand held the bread, the other tore, dipped, folded. The meal unfolded in layers of texture, felt first, tasted second. But eating by hand in these settings also required codes. The right hand was used. Fingers were wiped between bites. Water basins were brought out before and after meals for washing. To touch food with unwashed hands was both impolite and impure. In monasteries where silence was often observed, hands did even more. A raised hand might signal enough. A slight gesture might request bread. Food passed hand to hand wordlessly, and in that silence, touch spoke more honestly than speech. Meanwhile, beyond the castles and cloisters in peasant cottages, meals were simpler, but no less sacred. A stew pot hung over a fire, a loaf of coarse bread rested nearby. Children sat cross-legged on the floor. Parents portioned the food by hand, dipping, sharing, dividing. There were no courses, no forks, only warmth and the closeness of bodies gathered around something made together. The table, if there was one, was often shared with animals or tools. But the act of eating was human, and hands made it so. Far from Europe, in the courts of the Islamic Golden Age, the table was a place of elegance and deep ritual. From Baghdad to Cordoba, scholars, poets, and rulers dined not only to eat, but to exchange ideas, share verses, and express refinement. Meals were layered with fragrance, rosewater, saffron, cardamom, and the hands moved slowly, deliberately. Etiquette was written, memorized, passed down. Eat from the part of the platter nearest to you. Take only what you need. Chew quietly. Give thanks. Servants brought out dishes in courses, sweet and savory interwoven. Diners sat on cushions, cross-legged, hands clean, spirits lifted. Fingers shaped mouthfuls into neat bites, often with bread as a tool. There was music. There was poetry, and between the notes there was touch. This tradition of refined hand-eating extended into Ottoman Turkey, Safavid Persia, and Mughal India, empires where art and dining blurred. Meals were designed not just to satisfy hunger but to stimulate the senses. Silk cloths, scented water, gold-leafed trays, and hands, delicately anointing each bite. The left hand was not used. Elbows stayed close. Conversation was soft, and time was forgotten. In these moments, to eat with the hand was not lower class or outdated. It was graceful. It showed discipline. It showed upbringing. It showed awareness. Meanwhile, in East Asia, a different evolution occurred, one where the hand still played a central role, but in different form. In China, Japan, and Korea, chopsticks became the preferred utensils, yet their use still reflected the cultural reverence for balance, control, and presence. But the hand remained part of the mealtime ritual. Hands washed before meals, food arranged by hand, servings offered in careful balance, honoring texture, shape, temperature. In Japan, sushi began as street food, eaten with the fingers, still acceptable today, especially for nigiri. In China, buns, dumplings, and pancakes are often held in the hand before being bitten. In Korea, leafy wraps, sam, are filled and folded by hand before being enjoyed. And so even when tools were used, the gesture of the hand, the care, the offer, the acceptance, was never lost. Back in Europe, by the late Middle Ages, forks began to appear, but they were slow to be embraced. Imported from Byzantium, then from Italy, they were viewed with a mixture of curiosity and caution. A letter from the 11th century tells of a Byzantine princess marrying into a Venetian family. She brought forks with her, and was mocked for it. Church leaders declared it excessive, even blasphemous. "If God had meant us to eat with prongs," one wrote, "he would not have given us fingers." And so, the fork remained exotic for several hundred years. Hands continued to hold sway at the table. To touch was to trust, to share was to soften. Meals were not only about what was consumed, they were about what was offered. A mother feeding a child with her hand, a host placing food into a guest's palm, a lover offering a bite, no words needed. These acts were tender and enduring. In Jewish traditions, the hand is part of the blessing. Before meals, the ritual washing of hands, netilat yadayim, prepares the body and spirit. Bread is broken, passed, touched. The meal begins not with eating, but with acknowledgement. In Christian liturgy, the hand places bread on the tongue. In Hindu pujas, offerings are shaped, placed, arranged, all by hand. In Buddhist monasteries, food is given and received not as a rite but as a gift, each motion deliberate, each contact meaningful. Over and over we find the same truth. The hand makes the meal human. It expresses gratitude. It practices restraint. It touches food with intention, and it allows food to touch us in return. There is something fundamentally calming about this connection. When the hand meets the food, and the food meets the mouth, and the mouth closes and chews and waits, there is peace. Not performance, not display, but presence. And in that presence, the table becomes more than wood and dish. It becomes a place of touch, where forgiveness is passed with bread, where bonds are sealed with shared stew, where silence becomes communion. Even today we see echoes of this in how we eat certain things. We pass bread by hand at weddings, we tear challah together on Sabbath, we feed cake to one another on birthdays, we reach for popcorn during movies, we share fruit in baskets at markets, we offer sweets by hand in times of grief. We don't always realize what we're doing, but our hands remember. Long after etiquette changed, long after dining formalized, long after fingers were folded under napkins. Still, we reach, because to eat with your hand is not only a method, it is a memory of togetherness, of trust, of comfort, of care. And when the world feels fast or distant or cold, that memory becomes a quiet refuge, a reminder that we are not only bodies in need of calories, we are hearts in need of company. And sometimes a single gesture, a piece of bread passed, a spoonful shaped and offered, a hand reaching without demand, can say more than any word ever could. There are moments in history that feel sudden, sharp shifts, bright inventions, loud progress, but others happen quietly, slipping into the rhythm of daily life almost unnoticed. The way we eat changed this way, not with a declaration or decree, but with a subtle adjustment in what was considered proper, polite, modern. The rise of the fork was not a revolution. It was a retreat, a slow distancing of hand from plate, of flesh from food, of ritual from instinct. And somewhere along the way, the fingers, those ancient tools of touch and nourishment, fell out of favor. Let us begin where they once stood strong, medieval Europe. In a world of stone castles and flickering hearths, hands still ruled the table. Even among nobility, meals were eaten with the same instruments passed from generation to generation. Not silver or steel, but fingers, bread, and the occasional knife. Tables were long, often communal. Dishes were shared. Platters carried meat, grains, root vegetables. Bread served as a plate, thick slices called trenchers, designed to absorb sauce and grease, then either eaten or given to the poor. Knives were personal items, carried in pouches, used to cut meat or divide portions. But once cut, the food was lifted by hand. To eat without touching your food was almost unthinkable. The hand wasn't just tolerated, it was expected. Still, manners existed. One used the right hand. Hands were washed before and after meals. To reach too far or take too much was frowned upon. To pass food was a gesture of civility. To offer food from your own fingers an act of closeness. But then, in the shadows of formality, something else began to arrive. A curiosity, a foreign implement. 2 tines. Slender. Delicate. The fork. It traveled slowly, carried by trade and marriage from the Byzantine Empire into Italy. In the 11th century, a princess of Constantinople brought her own forks when she married into Venetian nobility. The reaction was skeptical. Clergy accused her of vanity. Nobles found the act strange. Why stab food when you could hold it? Even theologians weighed in. Was it prideful to reject the fingers God had given? Was it excessive? Unnatural? But time softened resistance. In the courts of Florence, Milan, and Rome, the fork began to settle in. By the 14th and 15th centuries, it became a symbol, not of utility, but of status. To use a fork was not about cleanliness, it was about identity. The nobility, always eager to differentiate themselves, began to embrace the fork as a signal of refinement. While peasants still dipped bread into stew, aristocrats began to separate food from hand, slowly, quietly. But even then, the fork was used sparingly, often for particular foods, sticky pastries, boiled fruits, certain sweets. Fingers still guided most bites. It would take another century for the fork to gain a real foothold. In France, during the Renaissance, courtly life began to change. Dining became a performance, a dance of protocol, elegance, and restraint. At the table of Louis XIV, every gesture mattered. Napkins were folded into elaborate shapes, spoons and knives were engraved with crests. Forks, now with 3 or 4 tines, became more common. They were no longer viewed as foreign, they were fashionable. In England, the adoption of the fork came later still. Through much of the 16th and early 17th centuries, hands still dominated the plate. But by the time of Elizabeth I, silverware began to appear in the homes of the wealthy. Imported forks, often from Italy or France, were displayed, gifted, admired, and so began a cultural transformation. The hand, once honored, was now hidden. Dining etiquette evolved quickly. Books on manners instructed readers to keep their hands still when not in use, to avoid licking fingers, to resist reaching, to sit upright, composed, distant. Meals were no longer messy, slow, communal. They became orchestrated, segmented, private. The fork in its rise brought more than metal to the table. It brought distance, between diner and dish, between action and feeling, between people. The emotional quality of eating shifted. To touch food became improper. To share a dish by hand, impolite. To taste before plating, taboo. And beneath these shifts, an unspoken belief grew louder, that hands were unclean. Science added weight to this. In the 19th century, the rise of germ theory transformed hygiene. Doctors like Pasteur and Lister demonstrated the unseen world of microbes. Suddenly, cleanliness became paramount. Hands, no matter how freshly washed, were suspect. Utensils, by contrast, could be sterilized, polished, contained, sanitary. And so the fork became not just a status symbol, but a tool of public health, decorum, and discipline. In schools, children were taught to eat with utensils from an early age, to chew quietly, to keep fingers away from lips, to sit still. In restaurants, hand eating was discouraged, even prohibited. Signs appeared: please use cutlery. Do not eat with your hands. Cultural memory began to fade. The tactile joy of tearing bread, of scooping rice, of licking honey from the skin of your own hand, these became curiosities, or worse, embarrassments. And yet, in kitchens and homes, the hand never disappeared entirely. It lingered in private rituals. A piece of fruit bitten over the sink, a torn corner of bread dipped into sauce, a spoon replaced by a finger when the yogurt ran low, a bite offered to a partner with a smile. We may have learned the rules, but we never fully forgot the language. Even as forks multiplied, salad forks, dessert forks, seafood forks, fingers remained. We reached for French fries with bare hands. We picked chicken bones clean. We fed cake to newlyweds without utensils. We brought popcorn to our mouths, not with tongues, but with fingertips. And across the globe, the story was different. In India, Ethiopia, Thailand, Mexico, Indonesia, and Morocco, the hand never fell out of favor. Utensils were adopted where useful, but the traditions of touch endured. Children learned not only what to eat, but how to eat, how to hold food gently, how to mix flavor with motion, how to offer a bite in a way that said, "You matter." In these places, eating was not detached, it was intimate. Even now, the right hand is used out of respect. Food is not bitten off a shared dish, but portioned with care. Eating together is a ritual, a connection, a trust. And slowly, in recent decades, the Western world has started to notice, not just the flavors, but the form. Restaurants that once required silverware now offer dishes meant to be eaten by hand. Flatbreads, street food, tasting menus with edible plates. The line between utensil and hand has blurred again. The idea that eating with your fingers is uncivilized is now questioned. People ask, what is more human than touch? What is cleaner than intention? What is more real than connection? And so the fork remains, Yes, it is a tool, a helper, a guide, but it is not the only way, nor should it be, because when the fingers were pushed aside, something else was lost too, a slowness, a softness, a sensory awareness. Touch tells us what is too hot, too hard, too delicate. It teaches children texture before language. It comforts the sick, it bonds friends, it feeds love. To reclaim that is not to regress, it is to return. To remember that food is not only fuel, it is story, and the hand was the first storyteller. So perhaps when you next tear a piece of bread or cup your palm to hold fruit or offer a bite without a fork, you'll feel something ancient stir. Not nostalgia, but recognition. That the fingers never truly fell out of favor, they only waited. Quietly, patiently, for us to remember what they were made for. The table has changed many times over the centuries, its shape, its setting, its sound. But the quietest change of all has been the one we feel most closely. The shift in how we touch our food and in how our food touches us. This final chapter is not about the past. It is about what lingers, what returns, and what we quietly reclaim when we choose to eat with our hands again. Not because we must, but because we remember. We remember that the hand was the first utensil. That it held not only nourishment, but care. That it was there long before forks divided and knives imposed distance. And that it was never really gone. It only waited for our return. In recent years, something curious has happened. As the world grows louder, faster, more digital, more distant, something simple, something human, has begun to call back. People are reaching again, not out of necessity, but out of choice. They are returning to the hand. Let us begin with the home. Not in grand kitchens or formal dining rooms, but in small, quiet moments. A parent feeding a toddler, not with a spoon, but with fingers, soft and slow. A couple sharing fruit in bed, tearing slices of orange, the juice sweet on fingertips. A friend offering a bite of their sandwich, no plate, no napkin, just trust. A grandmother kneading dough, tasting with a pinch, adjusting with feel. A student curled on a couch, eating popcorn by hand, one kernel at a time. These are not performances. They are habits of comfort. They are gestures of presence. The return to the hand does not always announce itself. It does not need to. It lives in the ordinary, and in the way that ordinary things done slowly become sacred again. Outside the home, in restaurants and cafes, the shift is visible too. The rise of finger foods is not an accident. It is a reflection. Tacos, wraps, bao buns, sliders, satay skewers, sushi rolls, mezza platters. Menus invite touch. Plates arrive without utensils. The expectation is not mess, but mindfulness. To eat with your hands in these spaces is not a rebellion. It is a return. A return to flavor that includes texture, to motion that includes muscle, to eating that includes being. And across the world, cultures that never abandon the hand now find their traditions celebrated, not judged. In Ethiopian restaurants, injera is torn and used to scoop lentils and spiced vegetables, served on a single platter shared by all. In Indian homes and thali kitchens, diners shape bites of rice and curry with thumb and fingers, bringing each mouthful with gentle precision. In Middle Eastern meals, flatbreads carry hummus, tabbouleh, grilled meats, olives, meant to be folded, pinched, dipped, passed. In Thai street stalls, sticky rice is rolled, offered tasted, without fork or fuss. In Filipino Kamayan feasts, food is laid across banana leaves, eaten communally by hand, laughter rising with the steam. These are not novelties. They are continuity. And in their rise we see not a trend, but a remembering. Because the hand offers more than function, it offers intimacy. It connects us, not only to the food, but to those around us. It breaks the illusion of distance. It replaces performance with participation. When you eat with your hands, you cannot multitask. You cannot scroll. You must pause. You must feel. This return to the tactile is part of something broader, a cultural longing for presence. We see it in slow food, in home baking, in family-style platters, in long shared meals without screens, in gardens, hand-tilled, in clay bowls, hand-thrown. We crave the things that remind us we are alive in the moment, that we are more than eyes and thoughts, that we are bodies too, and that our fingers, so often occupied by keyboards and glass, are still capable of remembering care. There's science behind this too. Studies have shown that eating with our hands can improve the sensory experience of food, that we perceive texture, warmth, and weight differently when fingers are involved, that digestion begins more effectively when the senses are fully engaged. In traditions like Ayurveda, this has long been known. The fingers prepare the mind, the motion readies the body, the awareness encourages gratitude. Because when you eat with your hands, you must pay attention, and in that attention there is peace. It is no coincidence that many religious and cultural meals begin with the washing of hands, not only for hygiene but for humility, for readiness, for the silent ritual of preparing to receive. To bring the hand to the mouth is a primal gesture, a child's gesture, a gesture of survival, of comfort, of learning. To do it again as an adult is not regression, it is remembering. Remembering that food is not only a transaction. It is a relationship between the earth and the body, between the cook and the guest, between ourselves and the moment. And so the return to the hand is not about rejecting modern tools, it is about choosing what they cannot offer. A fork lifts food, a spoon contains it, a knife cuts it, but only the hand feels it. Only the hand knows the temperature before the tongue. Only the hand can hold, adjust, cradle. Only the hand can feed another. There's a tenderness in this gesture, a wordless kind of grace. To eat with your hand is to slow down, to listen to the meal, to be part of it, not apart from it. And perhaps in a world so full of distraction, that slowness is not luxury. It is necessity. Because meals are not only for fueling the body, they are for feeding the spirit. And the spirit does not hurry. The spirit remembers stories told over bites shared. It remembers hands wiping crumbs from a child's mouth. It remembers the warmth of being served, not by plate or tray but palm to palm. It remembers that once the first gift we ever received, before words or wages or rules, was food, given by hand. And so as you reach for your next meal, whether with fork or spoon or fingers, pause. Notice what the hand still remembers. Notice what it still offers. Notice the way it softens when it serves, the way it lingers when it loves. Because the history of eating with the hands is not only in the past, it is still alive, still moving, still reaching, quietly, gently, waiting for you to return.